So if I you hit H, you can hide elements and you can bring them back. I'm going to hide this thing too. So I kind of have a clean area here. And I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm just going to add a plane. And then I'm going to hit S. I'm going to scale it. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to scale it again. So now it's pretty big here. And then I'm going to go in the sculpting mode. So I'm going to go down here in the sculpt mode. And I'm going to turn on this Dynatopo. So it's this little box right there. Hit OK. And then I'm going to just grab one of these brushes. So let's say this inflate brush. If you hit your square, I don't know if you can see this, but on your keyboard, your square brackets right here, this will make the brush bigger, smaller interactively. And what's interesting about those square bracket shortcuts, it's universal for other software tools. So even in Photoshop, if you're using the brush tool, uses the same thing. But what I can do now in Blender is I can just start to pull and grab things here, and it's going to increase the geometry. So there's different brushes you can play with. There's so many brushes here, you just kind of have to explore. So you can kind of create these hills. There's this grab, so you can just kind of grab sections if you increase the strength. And go into a certain view. You can keep on grabbing these things and really pull these things out to create kind of interesting kind of like rock outcroppings, kind of like when you go to Joshua Tree or someplace like that. So you can start to do really interesting things with this to create a really quick and easy landscape type environment. And then you got to be careful with the resolution. So I wouldn't subdivide this type of stuff, but if you right click, you can just go to shade smooth. See how I did that? There's shade flat and there's shade smooth. So when you hit shade smooth, you're not subdividing, you're actually changing what's called a normal. So in 3D, there's a line that exists perpendicular to every plane, which is used by the rendering software to smooth things out or to give things a hard edge look. But here, this creates an instant landscape. And you can kind of see the resolution isn't that bad. And it moves around rather nicely. So something pretty cool. And I should have shadows. If I turn on shadows and cavity, and for cavity, keep it set to both, it just gives it like this really kind of nice effect. So if I go back into edit mode by hitting tab, you know, everything here is basically a triangle. And I can select these things. So let's say I go onto one of these like rock outcroppings, and I can start to extrude these little elements out. And then what I could probably do with some of this stuff is select the faces of these little elements. And if you hit P, you can separate this element. So you hit P, and then you just say selection. And you see how this is highlighted in blue? Well, now that's taken out of this edit mode, and now it's back in object mode. So if I hit tab, I have two items now. I have this big landscape, and then I have this little piece of geometry that's a different color because I separated that in edit mode. So this whole workflow is actually pretty simple if you think about it. So why don't you guys try that? Why don't you grab a plane in Blender and go into sculpt mode and hit Dynatopo and start to build out like some sort of environment. what I do when I separate these pieces is I start to think about what items can exist in this kind of environment. So I'm just doing this kind of off the top of my head, but now that I have two pieces, and they're different colors, by the way, because over here in my shading, I have it set to random, which I'd like to do as you add new pieces. So it's not the true material color. In fact, if you click on this next little circle that represents materials, everything is still like a grayscale, but we'll get into changing the actual material. This is just for visualization. But if I hit on this piece now, I can start to think about what I can do with this. So, you can start to add some edge loops on these elements, extruding some faces out. So I'll go into face mode. One thing I want to talk about is more about edge loops and selection. If you hit Alt, it's going to select a whole loop. If you have faces selected and hit the edge, it will select all the faces going all the way around. And that way, when you hit extrude, actually, let me do that again. You can extrude this out. Now, what I want to do is do it based on, let's see, local. And now I don't want that one selected. Let me go back into that. Let's see. Not global. I have to get the right one here. I thought it was based on normal. You know what? I think what I have to do, oops, is okay, there you go. This is what I was trying to do. So I kind of want to extrude all the faces out outwards and not in one direction. So one of the tricks is when you hit E for extrude, then hit S. So hit E for extrude, then hit S, and then pull out. So to create something like that, something like that, and then maybe I will actually do it even more. Maybe hit E again, E, and then hit S. Kind of want to extrude it twice. Yeah. So that's like a double extrusion. So then maybe take something like this. What I'll do with this is select one part of it, select one face, hit Control L. It selects all the faces. And then I'll subdivide it just once. So do one subdivide here, split it up a little bit. And then I'll go into sculpt mode. And then I'll hit that Dino Topo again. And let me turn on and turn on Dino Topo here. Oops. Hit OK. And then maybe make this brush big. And we kind of doing this just to add some geometry to it. Then I'm kind of inflating it out. So I'm just trying to make like foliage or like plants. Did somebody have a question?
Yeah. Um, when you're pulling out like geometric pieces from the landscape, I'm trying to do it and it doesn't come up like as is. It like pulls everything else with it, so it's not like isolated. Does that make sense?
Are you separating when you hit, do you hit P and then,
Um, I can't. Well, do you hit P before you pull it out, or before you start like grabbing it?
yeah, if you want to separate pieces, so I'll go back. Here, I'm just kind of trying to create a mushroom. Um, so yeah, when you go into, let's say back into object mode,
Hmm.
and then I'm just gonna smooth that real quick. And then you select your landscape, and then you go into edit mode. So you select a piece of
Hmm.
geometry like this.
I'm not sure how to get to the step before that where you like you pull it out from the
Oh,
landscape.
yeah. So yeah, after I sculpt it, I just go back into edit mode.
Mm-hmm.
I select any of these faces, and I just hit
Mm-hmm.
E
Just
and
G.
E.
Oh, E. Okay. Oh, thank you.
Yep. So I'm just extruding little faces. And then what I'm doing is I'm taking these things and I'm turning them into things. Um, even like, let's say I go down here. This is kind of fun. So I'll select a bunch of faces down here and I'll hit E. So let's say this is going to become some sort of structure or building or piece of architecture. Um, I'll select all those faces, making sure I get them all. So I know I got them all right here. And then I will again hit P and separate by selection. And then if I go back into hit tab in the object mode, you see it's a different color. So I know I did that right. It's a different color. Now this is kind of fun because you can start to create buildings, let's say architecture, um, in this environment. As long as the faces are flat, that can become the basis for something. Um, you can also too, if you have like edges in there, you want to go back to quads, hit tab, go into edit mode, grab an edge, hit X, and you can dissolve that edge. You might want to stay in quads. It's just easier sometimes to model in quads, let's say. But let's say I have a structure like this. I'll go back into object mode. And then one of the things I like to play with, one of my favorite modifiers is wireframe. So if you go down into your modifier, you hit on that wrench, you go down here, click wireframe, and it creates this like lattice, which is really cool. It's cool for like scaffolding. If you kept your original geometry, you could actually use the original and create like skyscrapers really quickly and have lots of little windows from your original geometry. And then this becomes the scaffolding. And you can kind of play with thickness with this. And then you can, if you want to, you can subdivide this, come up with some really interesting little structures. Um, Sometimes what you might want to do is go back into edit mode and add edge loops, or subdivide it a little bit in edit mode. The thing about it is it's a modifier. So when I do go back into edit mode, it goes away. So you want to apply it sometimes, depending on what you're doing. So I can go down here, click apply. And then when I go into edit mode, it's applied. And then I can select the piece, select the whole thing, maybe subdivide it once, maybe twice. So this is kind of like a quick way of doing something. So now it's subdivided. So when I go back into object mode and I hit that smooth, um, it kind of retains the form a little bit better. So it's just an interesting technique. But what you can do is you can do this for all sorts of things. I'll show you different ways of maybe pulling out roads. Maybe you have roads here. Maybe you have like a platform that you pull out and you just extrude it. But once you have this type of grid set up too, you can duplicate this, hit G and go in the X and Y direction and kind of constrain it. You can hit the control key and kind of constrain it, and you can build up these tiles. And maybe you rotate it. So you hit R and you go into hit R, right click, but go into item up here and then rotate it on the Z axis like 90 degrees. If you start to kind of rotate things and move things around like this, you expand upon these landscapes. And then when you put your camera in a certain view, it's like you're there in this environment, so you quickly created this planet, the surface of some weird planet really quickly. And then you can save the tiles, save these tiles and reuse them for other things, even save out your architecture. You can save the whole Blender file when you go to save as. And, I'll call this landscape. And then bring it back into other projects when you need it. There's all sorts of really cool things you can do with this too. One of the things we'll think about is how you can actually turn this into an illustration and actually bring it into Photoshop if you want to paint and create like a really fast painting of some sort. So yeah, I'm just working on a little mushroom here, but it's kind of fun because you can kind of, as you saw, I just pulled it right from this landscape. Something like this too, there is this remesh. So when you get all that detail in there, you can always go into this remesh and hit OK. And it will take something like with all those triangles. So the sculpt mode has all these little triangles, and the remesh will turn them back into quads if you click on quad. So it's kind of like a nice little technique. So if you saw my mushroom earlier, it had all that faceting. So I turned it back into quads, and by using this remesh, it's in the little triangle here in object mode, and then smoothing it out. You can always go back into sculpt mode too once you do this and leave Dynatopo off, and then maybe even sculpt it, smooth it out even more. The thing about remeshing is what it's doing is it's giving you good topology. So that's a kind of an important word to remember, topology. Good topology basically means you have quads or squares that are basically the same size throughout your geometry. And why that's important is because, especially if you have characters, they're going to bend and deform in certain ways once you put a rigging inside the character. And if you have a lot of triangles like this, or weird topology like maybe like this, it's going to deform in unpredictable ways. If you have nice squares, it's going to deform in a way that's more predictable. Now for the landscape, if the landscape is something that's stationary, I don't really care too much whether it's quads or triangles. The only time that I care is when I start to render things out, and if you look at the scene and you see like weird creasing and stuff like that, you might want to apply that remesh as well. But if it looks fine and it's stationary, don't worry too much. The mushroom had a lot of weird creasing, and that's why I kind of remeshed it. You know, so that's one of the reasons why. I'm going to go back into object mode and then click on that landscape. So one thing, after you pull these things out, you might have holes. So there's like a hole right here. So if I go into edit mode, actually first, as you go into edit mode, your scene's going to get really busy. So sometimes you want to isolate. If you hit the / on your numpad, if you have a numpad, you can isolate things in object mode. So when you go into edit mode, you don't have the clutter of everything in that environment. And then what I would do probably is look for holes. So if you have holes here, you're grabbing the edges, and if you hit F, you can fill those holes up. So you might want to fill up holes as you see them. And that will clean up some of these things here. Like if there's here's a hole with that triangle. So I'm just grabbing these edges, grabbing edges I don't want to grab, but hit F, and then you can fill those holes with F. So that's fill. You want to be careful when it comes to geometry that has more than 4 sides. So when you do have geometry that has more than 4 sides, you're going to want to find a way to take that multi-sided piece of geometry. So you call it an n-gon. So if I grab vertices and then hit J, I can join those vertices. So you want to look out for anything that has more than 4 sides. And if you do find things that have more than 4 sides, grab the vertices like this and just hit J. And that is join. That's the same thing that we did in object mode. So it's just joining things together. So any questions about this whole landscape idea, about how to do this? So it's a pretty I think it's a pretty simple process to do this, and it's great to add structure to things. Another quick way to add some structure to this, you're just grabbing a bunch of faces. I'll hit E to extrude. I will go into X-ray mode and just hit 3 and grab those faces. Hit P, separate them out. Go back into object mode. This time I will Shift D to duplicate it. So now I have a duplicate here. So another kind of fun thing to create just like some interesting structure in the background is to go into your modifiers and go into that remesh and play with blocks. And just, you can play with these blocks. And it's kind of like a subdivide. If you take something like this and apply it, then let's say go into sculpt mode and do more like a Dynatopo type operation where you're just adding some geometry really quickly. Let's see. So just playing with the geometry there. then go back into object mode, and then go back into that remesh. Go back into blocks. You can create, it's interesting how some of these structures start to grow out of this. So it's a Minecraft look. But if you limit the number of blocks and then apply it, and then go into wireframe, then you can get something really interesting. So interesting lattice. And again, like duplicating this, Shift D, hit right click so it stays in place, go into wireframe, and it creates like a nice lattice kind of structure around that pre-existing geometry. And so what you can do is when we talk about materials, the lattice can be the main structure, and then the inner geometry can be like glass, let's say. So you can do some really interesting things with this. So yeah, are you guys good with creating a landscape? Based on what we did, did you try it as I was doing it? How many people was trying it as I was doing it? Because what I want you to do for when we go on break is actually build out a landscape and start to build out some architecture and kind of do what I did, like with, I know I have a lot of stuff here now, like with the mushroom, you know, see if you can build like foliage and, you know, natural elements and rocks, and all these different things. A couple other techniques that I want to show you that can help with this concept quickly is when I go into edit mode and I select like a point, let's say, there's something called proportional editing, and it's right here. So if you click this on this little dot, you're in proportional editing mode, and you have these different types of proportional editing type modifiers. So if I click on smooth, let's say, and then hit G and Z, and I pull up, and actually I might have to decrease this. Let's see. Go back actually. Turn on, I think connected would help. Actually, I'm going to grab a couple more here and then hit G again. It should I think the settings, it should start to pull things that are around it. There you go. So if you increase this proportional size here, you see what's happening. It's kind of pulling the vertices that are around it, and it's kind of following these different types of what you call fall offs. So you have these different fall offs. Now, when I grab this, it's not only selecting the points that I have selected, but it's selecting things falling off from that. There's a setting in here called random. So when you pull up from that, it starts to randomly grab some of these things. And if you play with that proportional scale, you can see how it kind of grabs even more. So you do a random type grab. It's kind of randomly pushing up the surface in different ways as I push and pull. So it's a really quick way to add variation in your surfaces. So if I go back into edit mode, you see it's getting really kind of rough and kind of rocky just by doing that. And then the other thing you can do is you can turn on select random. So what select random does, it just randomly selects points throughout. And then if you have that proportional editing on, especially if you have random selected here, and then you push up, it's going to slightly kind of modify everything a little bit. You can even play with scale and other things as well. And now when I go back into object mode, it's just giving this like really rough type feel to the whole landscape. So it's a really quick way to add some sort of detail onto this. You can see it's starting to facet a little bit. So I might want to go into remesh again and do that quad technique. So you hit quad remesh, hit OK. And then go back and hit smooth. So it's a little rougher, but it may help with some of that faceting a little bit. And there's other ways you can do this too. You could actually use that same modifier. So if you go back into your modifiers and use the remesh here, you got to be careful with this though. If you go too high, it's gonna definitely slow down your machine. These octaves are like duplicating every time you raise it up. So, and I probably went up a little bit too high with this. So I think Tristan might have done this on his machine. So now it's really bogging down. So what do you think about some of these techniques though, to quickly kind of modify the geometry, especially for landscapes?
I'm having trouble trying to remesh. I try to remesh and then like the entire thing disappears.
Yeah, the remesh is actually getting rid of geometry at a low level. So if you raise it up, but see what happens is if you raise it up too high with these octaves, they're kind of like exponential. So every time you raise it up one time, it's like multiplying it. It's doing it exponentially. So the higher you do, the higher level you go. See, let me see if I can escape. Like it's really making my system work hard. So sometimes it's better just to do the, there's the two remeshes, right? Are you doing the remesh as the modifier?
Yeah.
Yeah, the other remesh is kind of better. Because yeah, this modifier remesh can really bog it down.
Yeah, mine's loading too.
Yeah, so let's see what happens with this. Yeah, one of the things we'll do today though is actually we'll go into Maya a little bit. So I'll show you guys that. And what we can do is bring some geometry from Blender into Maya. When we use Maya, we're going to use Maya mostly for creating our characters. So we'll use Maya for rigging. Maya is really better for rigging and animation, in my opinion. There's just a lot more tools in Maya. It's more flexible. But Blender is great for just creating things quickly. So hold on, I might have to do a force restart. Let's see what happens. I don't want to lose this. Oh my God, it did it. That's pretty crazy. So it gave some, that's weird. Like I didn't even expect that it would like create like areas that look like puddles. I'm gonna bring this down. I think I should have just canceled it actually, but let's see if it works. So yeah, sometimes you will run into situations like this where you just went too far, kind of, and it will bog it down. Oh, cool. See, I went down to 1. There's nothing there. I'll go into blocks. That's actually pretty cool. So a lot of this stuff is like you just kind of discover things as you go forward. So that's interesting. It's very much a Minecraft type world, right?
How do you make it blocky looking?
You just click on blocks.
Oh, okay.
Again, be careful, don't go up too high. I turned on smooth. Oh, and I think if you, what happens is things kind of disconnect with these techniques. And the smoothing is really bogging it down as well. Once this ends, what I want to do is I want to go back into modeling and talk about our ships and see how we can change the quality. While this is going though, I'll give you guys this document. I have a document that I was putting together with some basic notes. Let's see. So there's some things here that I'm gonna talk about just for review purposes. And this is all Blender information, kind of going over some stuff from yesterday. While that's moving along, another thing I want to show you is, when we work on these scenes, we can set up the landscape and we can put elements in the landscape, but we're gonna have to figure out some ways to make the scenes look more extensive, to give them some sort of background that makes them appear that they're going off into space. So there's some tools out here where you basically take a shader, and it's okay, that's good, stop. It's pretty crazy. I'm gonna click out of that. I don't want to mess with that. So there's some tools out there where you basically grab a shader, and they're called HDRIs. So there's a website that's free, and it's called HDRI Haven. And you see how these images seem to like wrap around. So this is something that you would take with a 360 camera. But what we can do is you can download these and we can pick different environments, and they'll wrap around the whole scene in Blender, and they'll actually light the scene. So I'll send you this website. It's called HDRI Haven. I think there's other things you can pull from this too. But the HDRIs are free. It looks like they have models and other things that you can pull from. And maybe even textures, it looks like. So this looks really interesting. So this is a tool that you can take advantage of. But we'll light the skies with HDRIs. If you click on the sphere in this in your view panel up here, all the way over here, this last one is like a render view. And then you click on these options and you turn off scene world, and you raise these opacities up and raise the blurs down. Everything that you see in the background is an HDRI image. So it's actually being used to light this environment. Now, nothing in here has a shader. So we'll get into this in more detail, but if I grab like an element and I click this materials property icon, it's all the way at the bottom here. Click on that and I click on new. Then we can start to change the colors of things. So there's a base color, we can change that, but we can play with all these things like lower the roughness, make it metallic, and we'll go through a lot of these different settings here. Change the specularity. Subsurface is like an internal method where it glows from the inside. Here I'll add a shader to this too. So the specularity is actually now, I'm sorry, the metallics is actually pulling from that environment. and you actually start to get your reflection. So this is something you can do with your spaceship, is start to add different materials. And as you add more materials and adjust the settings, this is where you can start to get some nice realism in the scene itself. So you just kind of have to play with the background, play with these different landscapes, set things up in a way, and then you render out your movie based on this. But this is just one type of look. You don't have to go with realistic if you don't want to.